I'm here with Dr. Chuck again, and we're going to talk about addiction and divorce.
So we have been talking about how addiction comes up, and people who are married and have a partner who is an addict, or where both partners are addicted and then one gets clean, and they're looking to create new ground in their life. There are some options, and I think first of all we probably should talk about the signs of addiction. What are some things to look for?
Okay.
And then if you have questions or anything as I'm discussing this, or
Sure.
want to jump in or have examples, I think that would be great. Addiction is pretty tough because it is definitely considered a disease. It's a disease of the mind, if you will. And there are so many paths or theories, if in terms of getting help or understanding it. But the difficulty of it is that it creeps up on people, and as part of I think as part of this presentation, I think it's important to note that I struggled with addiction at one point in my life, and it's very difficult, and it's not discriminatory. Addiction is definitely not discriminatory. We are,
Right.
but addiction is not. Some of the signs to look for in terms of addiction, first of all, is erratic behavior, a major change in behavior. Missing work, missing money, spending lots of money, being in debt, isolation. There's a significant change to their behavior in terms of sensory impairment, health impairment, all types of different impairment, if you will. The other thing too is you'll have inconsistent behavior. A lot of lies. The person will say one thing and be doing another. It looks very similar to cheating, actually. I work with a lot of clients who are in recovery or work with their family members, and we discuss the concept that the drug actually becomes their new partner, their new focus. A lot of their energy is now focused into alcohol or other drugs.
Right, and we're going to be focusing mostly on drug-related addiction, not the other kinds of addiction, because there's all kinds of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of how people describe it when they're talking about it is, anybody that's in a relationship, all of a sudden this person's just totally withdrawn. And I mean, we're talking about any kind of addiction.
Sure.
You can get addicted to a video game, and you just like
Gaming
space
is an
out.
addiction.
Right.
You bet. And actually, we can talk about the addictions. All they have a very common ground, and that is the impact that it has on brain functioning. When we look at neurobiology, neurological research, we show that different parts of the brain light up very similarly. Cocaine addiction, gambling, shopping, sex addiction, love addiction, you name it. They all light up different parts of the brain, but similar parts of the brain, if you will.
What is the definition of addiction? Is it pretty much something that starts to take over your life and has negative effects and causes you?
It really depends on the theory that you're looking at. I mean, the very first of any approach to addiction was through Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill W., in the 1930s. The concept was that you have become powerless and your life has become unmanageable. That's one of the key factors of addiction.
Okay.
That what used to be manageable and where I used to show up in my life has now been taken away and is completely unmanageable and in disarray.
So kind of that loss of control. You're addicted to the subject, the thing, or the drug.
Right.
And it's just kind of sucking your life away and causing you all kinds of
Right.
relationship issues.
Right.
And financial issues, like you mentioned.
Well, the impact is across the board.
Sure.
I mean, it's life functioning, daily functioning areas. We can look at social, mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual aspects of our functioning, and addiction. Someone suffering with addiction is going to have impairment in all of those areas of functioning. So, for instance, they become isolated. They start screaming at their friends, their loved ones. They shut themselves behind closed doors, or they begin having this whole new set of friends that are not typical for that individual. That's the social impairment. We also start losing it. We no longer look for activities of joy. We lose joy in what used to bring us so much joy. We lose our passion, if you will. In mental, it becomes very irrational in our thought process. Defense mechanisms are at their peak. lying, manipulation, justification. I have a lot of addicts that say, well, I just didn't tell them, so that's not lying. And it is lying. It's lying by omission, which is definitely a defense mechanism. There's the emotional piece. With addicts, we usually see an emotional void. There's the erratic behavior, and there's a lot of screaming possibly, or what looks to be anxiety or anger. But I mean, the anger and anxiety are literally crisis levels.
Right.
Like they're screaming all the time, and they're erratic that way. There's a lot of fear, but that fear is numbed. Really what addiction is used to numb pain. We know based on research that most people start addiction. I've seen 2 different sets of studies, 3 out of 4, 4 out of 5 people start using for fun. I mean, we go to a party, we have a drink, we go, maybe we get high with our friends, stoned or something like that. And it looks fairly innocent. But what happens is over time, we become a slave to that drug.
Kind of the flax and cord thing. It starts out slow, and then all of a sudden it's just out of control. You're just like pulled away. Right. You're drinking every day instead of, I drink occasionally or I drink on the weekends. Now I'm drinking all day long. If I'm not drunk, I'm not happy. If I'm not drunk, I can't function.
Well, and part of that is the tolerance. The tolerance is the key difference between substance, what was classified in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 4th edition, text revised, was substance abuse and substance dependence. And the difference between those two was tolerance. Pretty much just tolerance. And that's the level that I need to get the same high as I was getting before.
Sure.
And when most people start off using once in a few months, and then all of a sudden it's daily use. And there's a period of time in between there where tolerance builds up. Okay. And you can see, characteristic differences between abuse and dependence in the 4th edition would be, someone who went to a party and drank too much, got pulled over and got a DUI. That would be a possible indicator of substance abuse issues.
Right.
But maybe they don't drink every day and there's not a tolerance. And so they're not dependent on alcohol. So we don't necessarily have substance dependence there. In the DSM 5th edition, what we have now is what's called substance use disorder. So now it's an umbrella that covers all of these things. Sure. And when I, in my work, when I diagnose, usually a mild level of use disorder would be a fairly temporary situation or a short duration of use or minor impairment or minor impact on functioning, if you will.
Right.
Whereas versus our moderate and severe levels of use disorder, that's where the dependence and tolerance issue is present. Right. When we look at impact on our physical being, each drug has different characteristics. For instance, I hear a lot of people talk about cannabis or pot, if you will, and say, oh, that's the miracle drug. But there are clearly some
people that smoke it all day, sit around and have the munchies, do nothing.
And that's part of the impairment. Right. It impacts our learning ability. It impacts our motivation centers in our brain. It impacts our memory centers. And you can always, and I do this in my substance groups where I highlight someone who's used pot significantly. And I don't get too many of them, but they come through every now and then, where there's this permanent impairment, permanent impairment. Yeah, just kind of like whatever, dude. Yeah, and I
surfer attitude.
Yeah, and most people don't realize that it's happening until it's too late. Right. And every drug has its impact. Now different drugs we view as if someone said pot addiction versus heroin addiction, one's much worse. But the reality is that we make the severity our own. And when I say that, because most people think alcohol isn't bad, et cetera, but alcohol kills. Sure. Well, alcohol kills 3 times as many people as all of the other drugs combined. All of them.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So
then the thing with addiction is, like you were saying, you keep going, you keep trying to get that high, and eventually you're going to get to a point. I've seen video footage of people that are so far into addiction that they've got needles hanging out of their neck. They're just doing they're snorting, they're smoking, and I'm just going, like, it would put a horse down, and they're like, I still can't get high, and you're just going.
So
wow, what a mess.
One of the things that keeps people in addiction is our societal judgment and pressure on people. Our lack of understanding of addiction. The Centers for Disease Control now compares addiction to such things as asthma, heart disease, because when we look at the recidivism rate to these things, diabetes or asthma or heart disease, if you will, when we look at the recidivism rates, return to baseline disease functioning, if you will, addiction is not much different. It's actually highly comparable. So then we look at the neurological research, and what happens is when someone becomes addicted, starts using, initially there's very minor, if much, impact at all, very unremarkable, unnoticeable impact.
Right.
But over a period of time, what starts happening is the drug is bonding to these receptors in the brain. And it starts disfiguring these receptors. And so literally in Van Wormer and Davis's research, meta-analysis, in the presentation that they have on addiction, they're stating that, we need to look at this more as a brain injury, if anything, because what's happening is the brain is injured after significant use. So who used to be stable and kind and calm is now erratic and in crisis and mean and devalued. And the reason for that shift is we have a significant impact on the frontal lobe functioning, the limbic system, all areas of the brain are impacted. And when someone gets sober, we have to wait for a year. Up to a year, 2 years in some studies that I've seen.
Before they're detoxified?
Well, before we really see if there's going to be a full clearing of the brain injury or damage that's been done. For some people, it's not. I saw one study in meth addicts that 100% of the people with meth addiction in this treatment program who stayed sober over a period of 1 year had full return of functioning of brain, brain activity.
Wow.
And the brain functioning itself. Not everyone has that, and I don't want to say, meth, everyone comes back from meth, because they don't.
Right. Some people lose all their teeth. They lose their life.
That's physical. Yeah. That's physical. But I'm talking actually about cerebral cognitive functioning. The neurological functioning. I have seen people where they are permanently paranoid. They have an edge to them where it's permanent paranoia, or they're just almost ADHD, really, or impulsive. Methamphetamine impacts the receptors that the neurotransmitter GABA, which is about impulse control and our behavioral maintenance, if you will. So there can be permanent damage there. So anyways, after a period of time, people can come back. But I think it's important that when we are dealing with addiction, that we're not putting the individual down, because it's not, we're not dealing with that individual anymore. We're dealing with this disease of the mind. It's kind of like,
basically.
Well, you have these episodes. I'm a fan of Walking Dead. You have these episodes where they can't hurt their loved one because it used to be their loved one.
Sure.
It's a very similar concept. I mean, the person who is addicted becomes a zombie, if you will. Mm-hmm. They become someone that they're not. Mm-hmm. They can return. I wanted to have this discussion, not only to educate in terms of addiction and to get insight, and by all means, I mean, I'm presenting not even a 101 on addiction here, but enough to I guess, trigger if someone has concerns to contact a professional to get help.
Don't let it spiral out of the control that you lose your loved ones, you lose your house, you lose everything except the shirt on your back, and maybe you lose that down under a bridge. You want to recognize that there's a problem, recognize I can't stop this, and get some help.
Right. And I want to talk about the other partner in the relationship. Let's say it's a situation where one person's using or has an addiction and another person is not.
Sure.
Usually the other person who's not is enabling, codependent, and so, they know something's wrong, and they go to confront their loved one, and the loved one says, well, you're always bothering me. And so then that person says, okay, I just won't bother you. That's okay, Or, oh, I must be wrong. Or, oh, my concerns aren't valid. Or here's some money. Or don't worry about it. Or keep doing what you're doing. Or I'm going to turn a blind eye. All of these things are what we call enabling behaviors. And it also becomes codependent, where I'm always trying to rescue someone or get them better, and I never get anything back. And that's the traditional, or what I would say the base core definition of codependence, where I'm always doing and never getting anything in return. And I get upset. I get frustrated. My worth is based on they should return this favor. The other partner in the relationship needs to draw some definitive lines and understand what their boundaries are. I cannot tell an addict, get sober. That doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Tough love doesn't work. We know from the research.
They've got to decide they want to be sober.
They do. And turning your back on an addict, that's the tough love approach, doesn't work.
Right.
What happens is we turn our back on that partner, and that person will then go out and be the person we find dead under the
right.
freeway,
Right.
What we do is we set our boundaries. I have set boundaries. I have a family member that would call and say, hey, do you have some money? And I, of course, no, I don't. I'm not going to give you any money you're using. And I will say that. I'm not giving
right.
you money you use. And the history says that you're going to use that money for using, for the substance. Right. And but what I did say is, if you're hungry, if you want to meet,
right.
if you need some,
I'll take care of your basic needs.
We'll go meet for dinner.
Yeah, I'm not going to enable
right.
your addiction, which leads to your destruction. I won't
right.
do that.
Right.
Because I care about you versus I'm trying to be some guy that's telling you how to live your life.
Right.
I just care about you. These are the boundaries I accept for my life. I don't want addiction ruining my life.
Right.
I won't allow it.
Right. And I'm not going to support you ruining your life.
Right.
But I do love you. I do support you and care for you. And when you're healthy, I'm here. But when you're not, I'm here in limitation. That's really what it is. Okay. And so I would take them out to dinner and show them love and show them kindness and give them a meal. And I did my part. Some of us have to come to the realization that with some addicts, they will not see it. They're not going to see it.
They're never going to figure out that it's harmful for them.
No. And they may even know it. There may be some awareness there, but there's no action behind that awareness. And it's a very difficult thing. And to watch it even is so tough for so many people because it looks like they can just put it down. And that's not how it works. We are talking about a medical and mental condition that's happening to this individual. And it's not something that I can just say no or just put down and move forward. Yeah. It's a process, and it's a long process. The commitment to sobriety. So
I think that's some good information. I think people can walk away at least, if not understanding how addiction takes a grip on someone's life, at least they'll be able to understand that there's neurological aspects
right.
of it, and there is a brain injury. It's not like these people are just bad people or they just have no control. I mean, there is an aspect to it where they're really, trying to recuperate from brain injury, like you say, because the brain is damaged by right. that drug.
And I always recommend, you've got, I remember back in the day when I was in my addiction, I was anti-Alcoholics Anonymous or 12-step programming or rational recovery. And now I still attend just because it's a connection. It's a social connection and I can relate with other people and talk about the progress in my life, and it's something that I'm going to be connected to for the rest of my life. Do I go 10 times a day? No, I don't need to do that. Some people do. Right. Some people do. But I also recommend to the other partner who is part of this enabling, possibly codependent, that they find the Al-Anon groups. Al-Anon is a group that is specific for people who have been in that same situation where they've been the enabler or codependent in the relationship with the addict. And so they can go and share. Again, getting help, getting a professional, getting intervention. I think another important thing is to understand our boundaries. How much am I willing to take? And I have to follow my own boundaries. I see a lot of people say, I'll leave if you don't get sober. And then they get high again. And I'll leave if you don't get, and it's just a repeated pattern, which is the codependency and enabling pattern.
Right, and you're doing that thing where you're turning your back against, their addiction, which...
Well, it's not about their addiction, it's about your boundary.
Right, it's you saying, I don't want this. Right.
This is my boundary. I have a boundary now in my life where I don't want someone in my life who uses, period. Right. And if they use, they're out.
I don't want that chaos. Right.
Is it that easy to say after 20 years of marriage? No, it's going to be a lot different. So after 20 years of marriage, I'm going to say, look, maybe we need a 6-month separation or a 3-month separation. You go get the immediate help and I'll be here to support you, but I'm not going to support this. Right. I won't be around as long as this is happening.
Sure.
But I have to know that I can follow through with that boundary. Sure. If I set a boundary, I have to follow through with it. And it's not about the other person. That is about me.
Otherwise, you get that back and forth kind of.
Well, it's a tug of war, but
Yeah.
but what I think one of the greatest impacts and most disastrous is the impact that this has on my self-esteem. Because I'm not following my own boundaries, all of a sudden my worth starts depleting.
Mhm.
I start feeling inadequate, and that inadequacy and depletion of my worth and esteem and concept, all of it is not coming because that person's using. Although this is a very difficult thing to deal with, the feeling that I'm having about myself is coming because I'm not following my own boundaries.
Is there a danger for people to kind of fall into the same sort of thing with domestic violence? You know how there's that
Yes.
honeymoon phase where people,
Yep.
you know, they'll get in a fight or whatever, and then but we get in a fight so we can make up later, and that's, you know, it doesn't work because you're just going to keep building upon that resentment and the anger and the hatred and the fighting and violence, and then it just, you know, it'll cataclysm out of control.
Sure. Bill W. defines insanity as doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different outcome. Okay, and the thing is that and Einstein said it. Yeah, I was just gonna say. I mean, all thing, and you know, when we talk about domestic violence, when we talk about addiction, and even I used to work sex offender work years and years ago. And they all have this common theme to each of them, and that is there's a cycle of or a pattern of behavior, cycle and pattern of behavior, and that pattern, that cycle will not stop
unless you draw those boundaries and stick to them.
No, unless the person with that problem makes the commitment to change.
The whole horse leading a horse to water, but not making.
And I can't. There's nothing I can do. But if I am with someone who is demonstrating that cycle of behavior, and they're all about power and control. They're all about the loss of control and this need to capture power in an external manner, substance or other people. Okay. There's an inability or focus on self-control. Like I just am unable to control myself.
Right.
So I try and control either a substance or other people. Right. Okay. But the person who's involved with that person in the cycle can draw boundaries, because if they don't draw boundaries, then they get caught up in that cycle and pattern of behavior in a codependent, enabling, or victim manner, if you will.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But they're not responsible for the other person. Right. We are only responsible for ourselves. We can only change. The only thing I can change is me. That's it. I can change how I act. I can change how I think. I can change how I feel. And that's it. I can't change my environment. I can do everything in my power to, but any number of events can occur to upset that change.
Sure. You can be the change that you want in the world, but you can't go out and force someone to recognize a problem.
You can be the change you want in this world, and that's what I was saying earlier. I can change my behavior.
Yep.
That's the B. Right. I can change how I feel. That's the B, and I can change how I think. That's the B. So I cannot change anyone else.
Right.
So if I want something in this world, I do what I want to get what I want.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. And if you're dealing with addiction, like we've covered, make sure you recognize the signs, get the help, and don't wallow in it. Don't let it get worse, because you can lose your life, your loved ones, your property. It's not worth letting it take control. So, you know, reach out to someone, even if it's not a professional, even if you aren't calling somebody that's a professional. At least get some help, and then get that intervention, and then go into the professional realm. Because I mean, people that have studied these things, they know not to view you as a bad person. No. I mean, other people won't know that kind of stuff. Professional will, like Chuck was mentioning, that, you know that it's a neurological problem, and that there are aspects that are not just willpower. It's not a weakness if you're addicted all the time. It's you know, it can very well be, like he's saying, a problem with your actual brain and your frontal lobe. So yeah, this has been a good video. I think it's been a good session. We should wrap up and talk about what do you think we're going to be talking about next time? Do you have any ideas?
Not a clue. Maybe even New Year's resolutions, huh? And the fact that they are bogus.
But actually, if you're going to make one, stick to it, right?
No. If you're going to make one, make it in May or June, and don't worry about New Year's resolutions. They don't typically work. No, I don't know what we're going to talk about. We haven't discussed, but one thing that we could also do, since these are being posted on YouTube is if people have
Comments.
desires or they want to see a discussion topic, please post something as a comment.
We'd love to hear feedback.
Definitely would love to hear from you, and I can look up, do some literature review and some experiential review and prepare something.
All right, well, thank you so much, Joe.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Take care.